My name is Diana, and I'm 44 years old. The day my daughter screamed at me was the day everything I believed about motherhood shattered. It started on a gray Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that feels heavy before anything even happens. The house was unusually quiet. I remember standing in the kitchen, washing the same cup over and over again just to keep my hands busy. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound until Alina's bedroom door slammed open upstairs. Her footsteps thundered down the stairs, fast, furious, and final. She stopped at the bottom, eyes blazing with tears she refused to shed. "What did you do, Mom?" she shouted, her voice breaking halfway through the sentence. I froze, the cup slipping from my wet hands and shattering in the sink. My heart jumped at the sound, but Alina didn't even flinch. Her jaw was tight, her fists clenched, and I could see every ounce of rage pulsing in her. "Alina," I said softly. "What are you talking about?" She took a step closer, and her voice dropped into a cold, trembling whisper. "You lied to me. You always lie to me. I finally know everything." The air between us turned thick, like something invisible pressing on my chest. I didn't know what she was referring to. I hadn't lied, not that I could remember, but she looked at me like I was the enemy. I tried to keep calm, reminding myself that she was still my little girl, even when she was angry. "Sweetheart," I began, "if you just tell me what's wrong, we can talk about it." "Don't call me sweetheart," she screamed, cutting me off. "You don't get to talk to me like that after what you did." Her words sliced through me sharper than any knife. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. Alina had always been fiery, yes. But this was hatred. "What did I do?" I asked, voice barely audible. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You wouldn't even admit it if I told you. You think you're some kind of saint. But you've been playing games with me my entire life. You—" She stopped suddenly, her eyes glistening with something between rage and sorrow. "You ruined my life," she whispered. Then she turned and stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. I stood there, staring at the empty doorway. The silence that followed was deafening. For a long moment, I didn't move. My mind replayed her words over and over. "You ruined my life." What could she possibly mean? I slowly sank onto the kitchen stool, pressing my hands over my face. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. Memories began flashing behind my closed eyelids. Alina as a little girl, running around the yard barefoot. Alina in tears the day her father left us. Alina's graduation smile. Every memory felt like it was slipping through my fingers, replaced by that look of contempt she'd just given me. We had always been close, even through the rough years. I raised her alone after Charles walked out when she was just 5. We had nights of canned soup and laughter, of whispered promises that no matter what, we'd always have each other. That bond had been everything to me. So how did it come to this? I thought about calling her, but I knew she wouldn't answer. I texted instead, just 3 words. "Please come home." Minutes turned into hours, and there was no reply. The sun began to set, and the light through the window turned the broken glass in the sink into a prism of red and orange reflections like little fragments of a burning world. By nightfall, I sat in the dark, listening for the sound of her car, hoping she'd come back. My mind kept spiraling, wondering if I'd said something wrong earlier in the week, if I'd missed a clue. But the truth was, I didn't even know what I was being accused of. Around 10 p.m., the phone rang. The sound startled me. It was so abrupt in the silence that I almost dropped it. I expected it to be Alina, maybe, finally ready to talk. But the voice on the other end wasn't hers. "Mrs. Carter?" a calm male voice asked. "Yes?" I replied, confused. "This is Mr. Greenfield, from Greenfield and Tate Law Offices. I'm calling on behalf of your late husband, Charles Carter." My blood ran cold. Charles? He'd been dead for nearly a month, and I hadn't heard a word from anyone since the funeral. I don't understand," I stammered. "Why are you calling me?" "There are some matters regarding his estate that require your immediate attention," the man said. His tone was formal but oddly sympathetic, as though he already knew this was going to hurt. I looked at the clock, 10:12 p.m., and tried to steady my breathing. Estate? What kind of matters? I believe it would be better if we discuss this in person, he replied. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning? I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to dredge up Charles's memory again, not after the years of resentment and silence. But something in his voice told me it was serious. Yes, I finally said. I'll be there. After hanging up, I sat for a long time in the dark, the phone still in my hand. My thoughts flickered between Alina's rage and the lawyer's mysterious call. What could Charles possibly have left behind that needed my attention now? And then a chilling thought crept in. What if whatever was in that lawyer's office had something to do with why Alina screamed at me today? That's when the phone rings again. A lawyer wants to meet with me about a family matter. I didn't understand why a lawyer would be calling me, especially right after that explosion with my daughter. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My head pounded, my eyes burned, and the house was eerily quiet. Alina still hadn't come home. Her bed was untouched, and her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried calling again and again, but she didn't answer. I couldn't decide which felt worse, the silence or the unknown. After pacing the kitchen for almost an hour, I finally forced myself to get ready for the appointment. The lawyer's office was in the old part of town, surrounded by those brick buildings that looked like they'd been standing since the Civil War. As I parked and walked toward the door marked Greenfield and Tate, I felt this odd chill crawl up my spine. Inside, everything smelled of polished wood and old books. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, led me into a conference room. A few minutes later, Mr. Greenfield walked in, a tall, silver-haired man with a steady gaze and an air of quiet authority. He wore a charcoal suit that looked as though it had never seen a wrinkle in its life. "Mrs. Carter," he greeted, shaking my hand firmly. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Of course," I replied, my voice tight. "You said this was about my ex-husband?" "Yes," he said, sitting down across from me. "First, please accept my condolences. I know it's been a difficult time for you and your daughter." I nodded, unsure how to respond. Difficult didn't even begin to describe it. He opened a leather folder and began reading from a stack of papers. "Your late husband, Mr. Charles Carter, updated his will shortly before his passing. There are provisions in it that directly concern both you and your daughter." I frowned. "Updated? When?" "Roughly 6 weeks before his death," he said. "He made several significant changes. That didn't make sense. Charles hadn't contacted me in years. Why now? What could he possibly have to say from beyond the grave?" "Mr. Greenfield continued, there's a trust established in your daughter's name. However, there are specific conditions attached to her inheritance." I leaned forward slightly. "Conditions?" He adjusted his glasses. "Yes, to receive her portion of the estate, your daughter must maintain what Mr. Carter described as a respectful and honest relationship with you." For a moment, I just stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. "Excuse me?" He nodded solemnly. "In other words, if your relationship with Alina becomes estranged, she forfeits her inheritance." I felt like the room was spinning. My daughter had screamed that I ruined her life just yesterday, and now this? "That can't be real," I said quietly. "You're saying Charles tried to control her from the grave?" "I'm merely relaying his wishes," he said. He was unusually specific about this matter. I shook my head. He left us with nothing when he walked out. Why would he suddenly care about a relationship he destroyed years ago? Mr. Greenfield's expression softened slightly. "Perhaps guilt, Mrs. Carter. People often make their most emotional decisions near the end." I exhaled, trying to steady my nerves. "And what about me? Is there something in it for me?" "Yes," he said, flipping another page. "You are also listed as a beneficiary. You've been left the family house, contingent on your daughter's decision regarding her inheritance." I blinked. "Contingent?" He nodded again. "If she accepts her share and maintains her relationship with you, the house will remain jointly owned under both your names. However, if she chooses estrangement, the full property will revert solely to you." It felt cruel, like Charles had designed this just to tear open old wounds. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, That if my daughter decides she wants nothing to do with me, I end up with everything? That's correct. The absurdity of it hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a test. A punishment disguised as generosity. Mr. Greenfield reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 envelopes, one sealed, one open. This one, he said, sliding the sealed one toward me, is meant for Alina. It contains her personal letter and the full details of her clause. The open one is your copy. I stared at the envelope, its neat handwriting spelling out my daughter's name like a warning. Does she know yet? I asked. He hesitated before answering. A copy was also sent to her address this morning. A heavy silence filled the room. I imagined Alina opening that letter, her anger from last night still raw and burning. What would she think? That I somehow knew about this? That I'd planned it? I pressed my palms against my eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. You don't understand, Mr. Greenfield. She hates me right now. This will only make it worse. He sighed. Sometimes, Mrs. Carter, the truth must pass through fire before it's purified. Perhaps this will bring you closer in the end. I wasn't sure if he believed that or just said it to comfort me. When I left the office, the sunlight felt blinding. I walked to my car in a daze, clutching the envelope like it might explode. My reflection in the car window looked older, smaller somehow. On the drive home, I replayed every word of that conversation. A respectful and honest relationship. How could Charles know that the only thing left between Alina and me right now was silence and pain? I sat in my driveway for nearly an hour, staring at the envelope on the passenger seat. My heart ached for my daughter, even through the anger. I wanted to call her, to explain that I had nothing to do with this, but before I could pick up my phone, I saw headlights flash across the street. Her car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out, eyes red, her jaw clenched in that same familiar way. In her hand was an identical envelope torn open. That evening, Alina walks back into the house, holding her own letter from the same lawyer. When Alina opened her envelope, I thought maybe it was a cruel prank. I was wrong. She stood in the doorway, clutching the letter in her trembling hands. Her eyes were puffy and red, her face streaked with tears she hadn't even bothered to wipe away. I barely recognized her, she looked more broken than angry now. She didn't wait for me to speak. She threw the letter onto the kitchen table, the papers scattering like snow. Did you know about this? She demanded. Her voice sharp but weak at the same time. I looked at the documents, instantly recognizing the law firm's letterhead. Yes, I admitted softly. Mr. Greenfield called me earlier today. I just came back from his office. Her eyes widened in disbelief. So it's true then, you knew. Alina, I just found out. Don't lie to me, she snapped, slamming her hand against the table. This has your fingerprints all over it. Of course he'd do this for you. You always wanted to control everything. I flinched. That's not fair. I didn't even know your father updated his will. She gave a bitter laugh. Oh, come on, Mom. You expect me to believe he randomly decided to make my entire future depend on you? Please. She turned away, pacing the room like a caged animal. I could see how much the letter had shaken her, even through the fury. Alina, I said carefully, I had nothing to do with this. I didn't ask him to put those conditions in. You know how Charles was, he liked control. He probably wanted to make sure we didn't what? She interrupted. Didn't forget him? Didn't move on? Or didn't stop fighting long enough to realize he was the problem? Her words hit me hard. I had spent years trying to shield her from the truth about her father's cruelty, the way he'd abandoned us, the emotional scars he'd left behind. Now, standing in front of me, it was clear she'd inherited more from him than just his temper. She picked up the letter again and read aloud, her voice shaking. In order for my daughter Alina Carter to receive her full inheritance, she must maintain a respectful and honest relationship with her mother, Diana Carter. Should this relationship become estranged, her rights to the estate will be revoked. Her hand trembled as she lowered the paper. Do you hear how manipulative that sounds? He's controlling me from the grave, Mom. I know, I whispered. I felt the same way when I read my part. What's your part? she demanded. I hesitated. I didn't want to tell her. But lying would only make things worse. He left me the house, I said slowly. But it's conditional too. If you decide to cut me off completely, the house becomes mine alone. Her mouth dropped open. Unbelievable. So no matter what I do, you win. Either I play nice and we share it, or I walk away and you get everything. It's not about winning, I said, my voice cracking. I don't want any of this. I just want my daughter back. But she wasn't listening. She snatched the papers off the table and shoved them back into the envelope. You know what, Mom? You can keep your house, your pity, and your fake apologies. I'm done. She grabbed her bag and headed for the door. I followed her, begging her to stop. Alina, please. Don't let him do this to us. That's exactly what he wanted. She whirled around, her eyes blazing again. No, Mom. This is what you wanted. You and your perfect little reputation. Well, congratulations. You've got the house and your peace and quiet. You don't have to pretend to love me anymore. The words cut deep. That's not true. I've never stopped loving you, not for a second. But she was already opening the door. Then maybe you should have told Dad that before he died. The door slammed, and the echo lingered in the air long after she was gone. For a long time, I stood there staring at the empty space she'd left behind, feeling like the walls were closing. The envelope sat on the floor where she'd dropped it, the torn flap like a wound that wouldn't heal. I sat down at the table, took a deep breath, and opened my own letter. The pages smelled faintly of ink and paper dust. Mr. Greenfield's neat handwriting summarized everything I'd already heard. But near the bottom, a few lines caught my attention, lines he hadn't mentioned. It said, "In the event of estrangement, Diana Carter will assume full ownership of the family home and all residual assets, as it is my belief that she has carried the greater burden in this family dynamic." I stared at those words until they blurred. Carried the greater burden. Was that his way of saying sorry? Or was it just another jab, another manipulation disguised as generosity? Either way, it didn't matter. His final wishes had already done their damage. He'd managed to drive an even deeper wedge between me and Alina from beyond the grave. I spent that night in silence, the house feeling emptier than ever. Every creak sounded like a memory. Every shadow on the wall looked like the ghost of what we used to be. By morning, her room was still empty. Her favorite jacket was gone. Her framed photos missing. She'd packed and left in the night. No note. No text. Nothing. I called her phone again and again, each ring going straight to voicemail. I didn't even bother leaving another message. My voice would just disappear into the void like everything else. For days, I went through the motions, working, cooking, pretending I was fine, but inside, I was unraveling. Then, 2 weeks later, my phone rang again. It was the same calm voice from before. "Mrs. Carter," Mr. Greenfield said. "I'm sorry to trouble you again, but there's been a development regarding your husband's estate. Would you be available to come to my office tomorrow morning?" My stomach dropped. What kind of development? He hesitated before replying. "It concerns your daughter's inheritance. There's been an update." I gripped the phone tighter, my pulse racing. An update? What kind of update? "I think it would be best to discuss in person," he said softly. "It's rather complicated." 2 weeks later, the lawyer calls again. There's been a new update to the will. When Mr. Greenfield asked me to return to his office, I could tell something serious had changed. His tone on the phone had been polite but heavy, like he was carrying bad news he didn't want to deliver. The next morning, I barely touched my coffee. My hands shook the whole drive downtown. I parked in the same spot as last time, staring at the red brick building like it was a portal to some cruel new chapter of my life. Inside, the receptionist recognized me and led me to the same quiet room with the mahogany table. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to drown out my thoughts. When Miss Greenfield entered, he looked more tired than before. His expression told me that whatever he was about to say wasn't going to be easy to hear. "Mrs. Carter," he began, closing the door behind him. "Thank you for coming again. I'm afraid there's been an unexpected development. My stomach clenched. You mentioned that yesterday. What's happened? He set a file on the table and folded his hands. Your late husband's sister, Margaret, has filed a formal contest to the will. I blinked. Margaret? Why? She believes your daughter's claim to the estate is invalid due to behavioral concerns. I frowned. Behavioral concerns? What does that even mean? Mr. Greenfield exhaled. She's arguing that Alina's actions, her public outbursts, her estrangement from you, and certain financial inconsistencies reflect a lack of maturity and responsibility. She's requesting that your daughter be excluded entirely. My mouth went dry. That's absurd. Margaret barely even knows Alina. They've only seen each other a handful of times in the past decade. She's your husband's sister, he said gently. Under state law, she has standing to file a claim. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding. So, what happens now? There will be a formal family meeting to address the issue, he said. It's not quite a court hearing, more like a mediation. You, your daughter, and Mrs. Whitaker Margaret will need to be present. I'll oversee the discussion and document all statements for the probate court. I rubbed my temples. I can't even get Alina to answer my calls. How am I supposed to convince her to come to this meeting? Mr. Greenfield gave a small nod, almost sympathetic. If she refuses, the matter will proceed without her, but I think she'll come. These things tend to attract curiosity, especially when inheritance is involved. I hated the truth in his words. Alina might be angry, but she was also stubborn. She wouldn't let Margaret decide her fate without showing up. What exactly does Margaret want? I asked. She's contesting the entire clause regarding your daughter, he said. Her proposed revision would transfer Alina's portion of the estate to you directly, under the claim that you're more financially responsible. I stared at him in disbelief. So she's trying to cut out my daughter and hand me everything? That appears to be her intention. Yes. I let out a bitter laugh. Unbelievable. She always hated me, and now she's pretending to support me? What's her angle? Family inheritance disputes are rarely about money alone, he said quietly. Sometimes it's about control. Sometimes revenge. I thought of Margaret, always elegant, always smug. She'd once told me, years ago, that I was lucky Charles had married me. I'd never forgotten it. Now, she was back to remind me that some people never stop keeping score. I straightened my shoulders. Fine. When is this meeting? Friday at 10 a.m., he replied. Here in this office. Alina knows? She was notified this morning. I exhaled slowly. Then I guess I'll see her there. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Alina had thrown her letter 2 weeks ago. The house was so quiet it felt alive with ghosts. My phone buzzed a few times, neighbors, co-workers, but not her. Every second that passed without hearing from my daughter was another reminder of how deep the damage ran. I tried to picture how that meeting would go. Alina sitting across from me, probably angry again. Margaret sitting there with her smug little smile, pretending to be the voice of reason, and Mr. Greenfield in the middle, trying to keep the peace. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain tap against the window. By the time dawn arrived, I'd already chosen my outfit, a gray blazer, black slacks, something neutral, something that made me look composed even if I wasn't. Friday came faster than I wanted. I arrived 10 minutes early. The receptionist led me to the same room, only this time there were more chairs. I sat down and tried to calm my shaking hands. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door opened. Mr. Greenfield walked in first, followed by Margaret in a pearl-white suit, her perfume filling the air before she even spoke. And behind her, hesitant, pale and tense, was Alina. For a moment, our eyes met. She didn't smile, she didn't even nod, but she didn't look away either. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, she stepped aside, and that's when I saw him. A man, tall with dark hair and a confident smirk, followed her in. He looked completely out of place in this setting, like someone who thrived on chaos. Mr. Greenfield cleared his throat. Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Whitaker, Alina Carter, and... The man extended his hand toward the lawyer. "Ryan," he said, smoothly. "I'm with Alina." My blood ran cold. I knew that name. I knew that face. I'd seen it before in a nightmare from my past. The day of the meeting arrives and Alina walks in with someone I never expected to see. When Alina walked into the law office, she wasn't alone. The man beside her made my blood run cold. Ryan. The name hit me before his smirk did. It had been years, but I could never forget the smooth-talking con artist who'd nearly destroyed someone I cared about. I'd met him once. Briefly, he was dating my friend Clara back then. Within months, Clara's savings were gone. Her credit ruined. And Ryan had vanished. Seeing him now, standing next to my daughter, felt like watching a vulture wrap its wings around someone I loved. He was dressed sharply, in a navy blazer and an expensive watch that screamed of ill-gotten money. His arm rested protectively around Alina's shoulders, like he owned her. My stomach turned. "Mr. Greenfield's voice broke the tension. "Let's all take a seat." We did. Alina sat next to Ryan, refusing to look at me. Margaret sat opposite us, her smile polite but poisonous. "Mr. Greenfield began flipping through a thick folder. "As we're all aware," he started, "this meeting concerns a recent challenge to the terms of Mr. Charles Carter's will. Mrs. Whitaker, as the contesting party, you'll have the opportunity to explain your reasoning first." Margaret nodded gracefully, crossing her legs. "Thank you, Mr. Greenfield. I simply believe my late brother's wishes have been misunderstood. It's my position that my niece, though dear to me, may not currently possess the judgment necessary to manage a substantial inheritance responsibly." Alina's jaw tightened. "Excuse me?" Margaret smiled like she was speaking to a child. "You're young, dear, emotional. It's understandable." Ryan leaned forward. "So you're saying she's too emotional to inherit what's rightfully hers? That's rich, coming from someone who didn't even visit Charles in the hospital." Mr. Greenfield raised a hand. "Please, Mr. Ryan, let's keep this civil." I stared at him. "You seem awfully invested for someone who just met my daughter." He turned to me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "I care about Alina's well-being. Someone has to, since you clearly don't." The jab hit its mark. Alina glanced at him with gratitude, and I felt the divide between us deepen. Mr. Greenfield continued, ignoring the tension. "Mrs. Whitaker, please elaborate on your concerns." Margaret adjusted her pearl necklace. "It's not only about emotional stability. There are financial irregularities." I frowned. "What kind of irregularities?" She folded her hands. "Certain withdrawals from shared accounts. Spending patterns inconsistent with Alina's declared income." My breath caught. Shared accounts. That meant our joint savings, the one I'd noticed shrinking weeks ago. Alina spoke up quickly. "That's none of your business." Margaret's smile didn't falter. "It becomes my business when it concerns the estate. If your financial decisions are being influenced by questionable parties, that reflects directly on the family's legacy." Her eyes flicked toward Ryan, then back to me. Ryan chuckled under his breath. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to paint her as irresponsible because you want control of the money." Margaret's tone remained silky smooth. "I have no interest in control. I'm only ensuring my brother's intentions are honored." Mr. Greenfield cleared his throat and shuffled the papers. "For context," he said, "Mr. Carter's updated clause includes a secondary condition. Should Alina engage in deceptive or manipulative partnerships that compromise her integrity or judgment, she forfeits her inheritance." This clause was added in his final revision. The room fell silent. Alina's face turned pale. "What does that even mean?" she asked. I could barely breathe. Charles had known. Somehow, he'd anticipated something like this. He'd built a trap, one that would activate if Alina ever got close to someone like Ryan. I leaned forward, my voice trembling. "Alina, listen to me. This man, Ryan, he's not who you think he is. He's dangerous." Ryan laughed. "Wow. You really don't stop, do you? First you turn her father against her, and now you're trying to poison her against me." "That's not true." I snapped. I met you years ago, Ryan. You conned a woman I knew out of everything she owned. Alina's eyes widened. What? That's not possible. I looked directly at her. Ask him about Clara Jensen. For the first time, Ryan's expression faltered. But only for a second. He recovered quickly, smirking again. I have no idea who that is. She filed a police report, I said. You disappeared before they could arrest you. Alina shook her head, backing away slightly. Mom, stop. You'll say anything to make me doubt him. I'm telling you the truth. Enough, she yelled. Standing up so fast her chair screeched against the floor. I came here to defend myself, not to listen to more of your lies. Alina, Mr. Greenfield said carefully. This is important, these allegations. She glared at him. You think you know me? You all sit here judging like I'm a child. I've made mistakes, sure, but I'm not stupid. Ryan reached out, putting a hand on her shoulder. It's okay, babe, we'll handle this. The casual possessiveness in his tone made me want to scream. Mr. Greenfield finally spoke again. Given the emotional nature of this meeting, I suggest we reconvene in a week after all parties have had time to provide documentation and statements. Margaret agreed immediately. That seems wise. Ryan stood, helping Alina to her feet like a knight, rescuing a damsel. Fine, he said coldly. But next time, maybe try treating her like a human being instead of a liability. As they turned to leave, he paused by my chair. Leaning close enough that only I could hear, he whispered, You're going to lose everything, Diana. Then he smiled and walked out, his arms still around my daughter. I sat there frozen, his words echoing in my head. Margaret's satisfied smirk only deepened my dread. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted, a fractured family and a confused daughter walking straight into the arms of a predator. When the room finally emptied, I dropped my face into my hands. I didn't even know who I was angrier at, Ryan for manipulating her, or myself for not seeing it coming. Mr. Greenfield rested a hand on my shoulder before leaving. Be careful, Mrs. Carter, he said quietly. I've seen this kind of man before. They don't go away easily. Ryan leans toward me and whispers something that makes my heart drop. You're going to lose everything. Ryan's threat haunted me. But what came next was worse than I could have imagined. For days after the meeting, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice whispering that chilling promise, you're going to lose everything. I couldn't tell if it was a warning or a declaration. Either way, I knew it wasn't empty. Men like Ryan didn't bluff. The following week passed in a blur of tension and dread. Alina refused to answer my texts or calls. The few times I saw her name flash across social media, she looked different, smiling too widely, wearing clothes that didn't fit her usual style. Always with Ryan somewhere in the background. His arm was draped over her like she was a trophy. I couldn't focus on anything. I messed up at work, forgot appointments, barely ate. Every part of me was consumed by this gnawing fear that my daughter was slipping deeper into his control. Then, one morning, I logged into my bank account and froze. Our joint savings account, an account meant for emergencies, where both Alina and I had contributed over the years, was almost empty. Thousands of dollars gone overnight. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the transactions. Several large withdrawals had been made in the last 48 hours, each labeled ATM withdrawal. I hadn't touched the account in months. That meant someone else had. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I already knew. I called Alina immediately. She answered on the fourth ring. Her tone defensive from the start. What now, Mom? Where's the money, Alina? I asked sharply. The savings account, it's nearly empty. Did you take it? There was silence for a second. Then a scoff. Wow. Straight to accusations. Nice. Don't play games with me, I said, trying to stay calm. I just need to know what's going on. Fine, she said. Yeah, I took it. It's my money too. I needed it. For what? For my life, Mom. You know, the one you're not part of anymore. Alina? That account was for emergencies. Not? Don't you dare lecture me, she snapped. I'm done being controlled by everyone, including you. I felt my heart break a little more with every word. "Who told you to take it?" I asked quietly. "Was it Ryan?" "Stop it," she shouted. "Stop blaming him for everything. He's been the only one actually helping me." "Helping you do what? Run away from your family? Drain your savings?" "Helping me start over," she yelled. "Something you clearly don't understand." And just like that, the line went dead. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the phone in my hand. I could feel the tears building, but they wouldn't fall. They just sat there behind my eyes, heavy and burning. That night, I called Mr. Greenfield and told him everything: the missing money, Alina's behavior, Ryan's involvement. He listened carefully, his voice calm but serious. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "I'm afraid this complicates matters significantly. If these withdrawals are linked to the estate funds, it could affect both your and your daughter's standing." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Margaret could use this to strengthen her argument for exclusion. She could claim financial irresponsibility or even misconduct." My stomach twisted. "But I didn't do anything wrong." "I know that," he said. "But perception matters in these cases. We'll need proof that you weren't involved." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being cornered from all sides, Margaret on one, Ryan on the other, and Alina caught helplessly in the middle. That's when I decided I needed help. Not from a lawyer. From someone who could uncover the truth. The next morning, I met with a private investigator named Paul, an old acquaintance from my office. He'd handled a few fraud cases before and agreed to look into Ryan quietly. Within a few days, he started sending me updates. Photos, documents, odd patterns. Ryan's name popped up in several suspicious business filings, including one connected to Margaret's family trust. I couldn't believe it. Margaret and Ryan were meeting behind the scenes. The pictures Paul showed me made my blood boil. There they were, sitting at a cafe together, leaning in close, smiling like old friends. It didn't make sense. Why would my late husband's sister, who supposedly wanted to protect the estate, be colluding with the man manipulating my daughter? I needed answers. That night, I called Margaret directly. When she picked up, her voice was syrupy sweet. "Diana, how lovely to hear from you." "Cut the act," I snapped. "Why are you meeting with Ryan?" There was a pause on the other end, then a quiet chuckle. My, you've been busy." "Answer the question." "I don't owe you any explanations," she said coolly. "But since you're so curious, let's just say Ryan and I share a common interest." "What interest?" "The truth," she said smoothly. "You've made quite a mess of things, haven't you? Your daughter's finances are in chaos, and now the court will see you for what you really are: reckless and unstable." My throat tightened. "You set this up," I whispered. "You're trying to destroy me." "Destroy you?" she repeated, feigning surprise. "Oh, Diana, you're doing that all by yourself." She hung up before I could say another word. I stood there for a moment, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles went white. My pulse pounded in my ears. I knew then that Margaret wasn't just interfering, she was orchestrating something. I called Paul again, demanding every bit of information he could find. When his next report came in, my worst fears were confirmed. Ryan had transferred several large sums to an account linked to Margaret's shell company. The two of them weren't just manipulating Alina, they were setting me up for something far bigger. I printed out the photos and documents, my hands shaking as I laid them across the table. Proof. Hard proof. Finally, I had something solid. The next morning, I drove to Mr. Greenfield's office and handed him the folder. He flipped through the pages, his expression darkening with each turn. "This is serious," he said finally. "If what you're showing me is accurate, this could change everything." I nodded, my voice barely a whisper. "Then what do we do?" He looked up at me gravely. "We prepare for war." Why would my ex-sister-in-law be meeting secretly with my daughter's boyfriend? The photos of Margaret and Ryan together changed everything. Seeing them laughing over coffee like old friends was a punch to the gut. For days, I couldn't stop staring at those images, trying to make sense of them. Margaret, the woman who always acted so proper, so righteous, was secretly working with the same man manipulating my daughter. It didn't feel real, but deep down, it made a sick kind of sense. Margaret had always hated me. From the moment Charles and I married, she'd looked down on me as if I wasn't good enough for her brother. I used to think it was jealousy or snobbery. But now I saw what it really was: control. She'd lost it when Charles married me, and she'd been trying to take it back ever since. I couldn't let her destroy what little I had left, especially not my daughter. The next day, I called Margaret and demanded a meeting. I told her I wanted to talk privately, without lawyers or paperwork. She agreed far too easily, her voice dripping with false warmth. We decided to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, the same one where Paul had photographed her with Ryan. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window with her usual poise. A pearl necklace glinted at her throat, her manicured fingers wrapped around a teacup. She smiled like this was just another social visit. "Diana," she greeted sweetly, "it's been too long. Let's skip the fake pleasantries," I said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Why are you working with Ryan?" Her smile didn't fade. "You're direct. I have proof."